Hey there, Libra. This is Seven Scorpion Tarot, and I want to welcome you to tonight's reading. So, tonight I was checking out the celestial weather, and Black Moon Lilith is the only thing that I was seeing in your sign. And I am actually in my Lilith return right now because that is my Lilith placement. And depending on which calculator I use, it seems to be she either falls in the seventh house or the ninth house. So either relationships or upsetting the status quo. Either one kind of works for how her placement has worked out for me, but the one that really fits um, her story is Libra in the seventh house, being in regards to relationships, because she is was Adam's first wife, and the background there is that, how do I put this? They had some disagreements about relations, and she was not being treated equally. Her needs, her wants were not being heard, and there was an expectation of subservience from her. And as opposed to submitting to that expectation, as her position was, they are of the same mud of the earth as each other, there should be no hierarchy between the two. um, she exiled herself from paradise as that was her only other option. And to me, she is the OG feminist icon. I actually am wearing my ring with her sigil on it right now. And that is just living in integrity to me, that she had the option to literally stay in paradise, but paradise was not treating her well, so she bailed. That is staying true to yourself in a way that I have never seen. Um, so I'm hoping that maybe this reading will shed some light on how do we stay true to ourselves? What's really cooking down there in like the shadow? So we'll do a self shadow and ego and see where that gets us. And in a weird way, like regardless as to which house is truly correct for me, whether it's the placement is in the seventh or the ninth house, that being true to myself not only helps me develop authentic relationships, but it is upsetting the status quo. I can just kind of feel, I don't know, a stirring in that I am more my voice than I have ever been before. I can see that reflected in my confidence, particularly at work, that like I'm saying no and I'm saying it from my chest. And it feels good. It feels really good. And the status quo is for me to be a people pleaser. And I'm shuffling for the self right now. So I am a recovering people pleaser. It was my family structure that conditioned me to be that way. As the fawn response in complex PTSD is really nefarious. Um, and it's so pure, it makes my heart hurt. That someone has developed behaviors of like praise and making someone else feel good so that they aren't treated bad. And as a means of like, I was in an inescapable situation, like, what else am I supposed to do? You have to develop a way to get through that. And kids' brains are incredibly adaptive and they're incredibly resilient. They will do what needs to be done to get them through. And in that moment, your brain's not going to concern itself with, will this become maladaptive if it goes on too long? That's for doctors. Yeah, see? Justice in reverse. Because it will. It will become maladaptive if it goes on too long. Oh, and the Libra card. Um, ring a bell. That's exciting. um, and very fitting for Lilith too, because she was denied justice, having to subject herself to demonization in order to escape oppression. That's not okay. That's a flawed system. Uh, I certainly don't want to knock anybody's beliefs. I'm just going based on like the stories themselves. Um, my interpretation of them, because I interpret the serpent in the Garden of Eden as Lilith, seeing as the morning star didn't show up until Isaiah, to the best of my knowledge. And this might be coming up in the self because you maybe have been denied justice too. So in Virgo's reading that I just did earlier and many others, I've mentioned that I've estranged myself from my family. So I'm kind of walking in Lilith's footsteps in that sense, in that I wanted to make it work where I was. I wasn't given that choice. Me simply submitting to how others do things, that's not a viable solution. There has to be a solution for me as well, that's viable for me as well. It can't just be this one way street thing of like, the problem is I'm not obeying. The problem is I'm being defiant. Like, nope, nope, nope. The problem is this system sucks. Like, this is not, it's not okay the way that I'm being treated. And there seems to be like a puzzle piece missing in that family structure that like they cannot comprehend that the way I was being treated was a problem. And it's not me disagreeing with them. That's the problem. Start shuffling for the shadow. And that it was that way when I was a kid, like growing up as a kid, as a teenager. Um, it was not that like the points I was making were invalid. It's that I was being disobedient. Like I used to get in trouble around um the Pledge of Allegiance all the time. I live in the States. And I don't think they do the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. Like I don't have kiddos. So I'm not sure. And I'm not going to have kiddos. So somebody else is going to have to tell me if this is a thing or not. And I would get in trouble for either not standing up at all or refusing to say the one nation under God part. Because even though, like now, I identify as an omnist, I went through various phases at that time of exploring different beliefs, things like that. The time I'm thinking of would have been when I was heavily exploring paganism. And um, I took major issue with the one nation under God because, like, which one? And that's a direct conflict with the First Amendment, I thought. And I would just be in and out of the principal's office about stuff like this, about like ethical questions, like real legitimate ethical questions, but it was being painted as me being just disobedient because they would not engage with me. It was much easier to just label me as disobedient. Because that whole like Pledge of Allegiance thing is like, okay, this is giving North Korea. I don't like, no offense to any North Koreans out there who are probably not listening to tarot, but like just in case, I don't want to offend anybody for where you came from, for how the people in charge are acting. You know, I think you get it. But it'd be all sorts of stuff like that, that like, if I don't agree with the system, whatever that respective system may be, there's something wrong with me, not that there's something wrong with the system. And that never made a lick of sense to me, because how could it possibly be exclusively a one-way street? That doesn't make sense. That's just not logical. And there's a having a laugh with my therapist about this. It's like a disobedient disorder, something that I am shocked I did not get diagnosed with that. I don't want to make light of anybody's situation, but that is like one of the many things that could have been slapped on my forehead, as opposed to actually recognizing my opinions and values as an autonomous individual with agency. Because that's much harder. It is much harder to do that, to recognize people's agencies, than just like give her pills, keep her docile. Women and their thinking. Like, they're not allowed to lobotomize me anymore, so uh drugs. Just my personal opinion. Not saying don't, I'm not saying medicine is bad. I want to really clarify that really hard. I'm not saying medicine is bad. I'm saying I've had bad doctors and bad teachers and bad parents and stuff like that. Like, medicine is not bad. You know, the anticonvulsants that I take, uh, those turned my life around legitimately once I was on the right medication for what I actually have, not being given medication for something I do not live with. And that type of medication is actively harmful for my situation. But what do I know? It's not like as soon as I immediately like started going against that doctor's orders, estranged myself from my family and almost everybody I ever knew, I started getting better. What does that say about them? And again, I cannot emphasize enough, I had an abnormal experience with a bad doctor. Medicine is not bad. I will forever advocate for checking your horoscope while you're waiting for your COVID shot. Big proponent of medicine and therapy and all that. So do not at me, don't twist my words. Do not. I do not take responsibility for you. Shadow. Appreciate the cards just letting me ramble. I'd like a card for the shadow, please. Ooh, the Hierophant. A lot of major arcana energy, big energy. So the teacher, the system, literally, like talk about status quo. But interesting choice being Varys from Game of Thrones in this, in that him and his little birds, like, he was loyal to the highest good of all. Because I think he came from Flea Bottom, possibly, potentially, allegedly. Um, I'll start shuffling for the ego. But he came from the slums, essentially, right? And eventually made it in, where did the Lannisters live? Everywhere. But like, what was that main one? It wasn't Casterly Rock. It was like where the Red Keep was. Whatever. Uh, but he crawled his way up from the bottom after being poor, mutilated, and he never forgot it. He never forgot like where he came from. And it made him seem shady in some instances, in that he was not, this feels important that I said, like, he was, it made him seem shady, and Seven of Swords popped out for the ego. Uh, so he was loyal, not necessarily to the throne per se, but to the person who would utilize the throne for the highest good of all. Like, who would give the throne the most heart, who would use the throne for the people. That's what mattered. Like, he was loyal to the power of the throne and how it could be utilized. And so, this coming out in the shadow, you could be questioning, what has the system done for me? What has it done to me? Is that good? Is it bad? Is it neutral? Like, what is it? Like, just assessing, like, what are the implications of how the system has treated me in my life, and are they just or unjust? And at least in this reading, justice is coming out blocked. It's coming out in the reverse. So this could be perceived or actual injustice. So in the ego, we have the Seven of Swords and the Ace of Swords. Ooh, reversed. Possibly the way you feel about the system is starting to burst through. You can't tolerate injustices anymore. I know I've been suffering with that, with like all the immigration stuff that's going on. There's definitely been some times where I've been bursting at the seams, for sure. But then the Ace of Swords. So this being reversed, this is really interesting how he's holding this. Like, this feels to me in the upright, this feels more defensive, and then reversed feels more offensive, like that reverse coming out of the hilt. But the other thing that came to mind was the pommel. What is this sword's name? Storm? Longclaw. Longclaw, right. So in this show, in, I want to say, the 7th season, there was like some sort of reflection or something in the eyes of Longclaw that spun out some sort of like fan theory that I was totally on board for. That, like, when Jon Snow, it was the seventh season, yeah. So when Jon Snow went under the water after Daenerys and company left, after she lost one of her dragons to, and if I have to do a spoiler alert at this point, like, come on. But she had lost one of her dragons to the Night King, and Jon Snow went under the water. He got left behind, and when he popped up out of the water, like on the shore, and Longclaw was there, there was some sort of reflection that like the black eyes, or like they looked white and then they went back to black, or like however the color scheme normally is. And I was so on board with the idea that Bran had warged into the sword to like keep an eye on what was going on, because I think like in the book, potentially there's like a spirit to this sword, or if Jon Snow was the prince that was promised, then this sword was actually Lightbringer and it might have a soul, and it was like this whole thing. And I was so sad that that didn't pan out. That like it wasn't this just like Easter egg find. Uh, but interesting that that's coming out in the ego, because this is like the sword of truth, the Ace of Swords. So do you have to work through your perception of the system to get to the truth, to get to how you really feel about it? Because the Hierophant is the only card in the upright. So, however this is making you feel, like whatever example is coming to mind of the system, like I know we typically think in like a more macro, excuse me, a more macro view of that when I say the system, but that could be your immediate household, like a family system. That could be your employer. That could actually literally be like the system, given the political climate right now. Um, so just getting in touch with how do you feel about the structure that you're in right now? Is it tenable? Is it making you happy? Do you feel like you're being treated equally or no? And if you don't feel like you're being treated equally, are you in like an either or situation like Lilith was, that you either stay or demonize yourself? Or is there a middle path? Is there a third way? Because the stories we see, on TV and movies and even through myth, those have a tendency to be distilled in order to get the lesson across. Because if they weren't, like the normal day to day filler would be pretty boring. Because most days are unremarkable. So these are only filled with the remarkable stuff. So something to chew on. We'll get some underlying. Oh, that's too many. I want to get a oracle card from the Lunar Nomad Oracle here. For maybe just an undercurrent. Could even be an umbrella. Sort of depends on how this plays out in your life. Interesting readings today, though. Both Virgo and this one, like all but one card reversed. So some heavy stuff going on. And I wonder too, with the Seven of Swords being in the ego, where the persona part of the psyche is going to fall, people might be interpreting you as being deceptive when really you might just be protecting your truth. Because particularly if you are, in a family system or even in like a relationship or something where it's unsafe to reveal like how you truly feel, people might be picking up on that, you know? And you got to do what you got to do. Like, if people aren't treating you well, you really have no obligation to being respectful, to being honest with them, to anything. That was kind of a paradox that was presented to me when I was younger that, like, my parents, well, at least one of them, were very deceptive with me, but there was an expectation of honesty from me towards them. Because why wouldn't there be? Ooh, Cross 36. This is haunting. Cross to bear was the phrase that just came to mind. And I don't know if I ever use that phrase right or if I really know what it means. But I think it's like, is it like the scarlet letter? Like everybody can see you bearing this burden? Like it's something visible. But out of all the birds on here, there's only one black crow. Interesting. And in Virgo's reading, on the Eight of Cups card, 7 cups were lumped together and there was one separate. So there's like a theme of like one thing. One of these things is not like the other. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're saying like screw the system. Like there's a bunch of flaws. Like why are we still doing this? Um and maybe you're going against the grain. And that's a hard position to be in, of being the truth teller, of being the one to point out injustices, because then you're an agent of change. And people don't like change. They really don't, even if that's good for them, uh, or even if it's positive change, rather, because it's up for them to decide if something's good for them or not. Uh, they don't like change. I don't like change. Like, I'm a people too. I like, especially with trauma brain, like, I like to know what to expect, even if it's bad. That's the hurdle to progress, is our brains preferring familiarity. Oh, and perfect, because we were talking about the system, so we got a Rage Against the Machine song. I remember, I think it was probably like 6 years ago, 4, 6 years ago ish. People are like just finding out that Rage Against the Machine is a political band. Or like, what machine do you think they were raging against? Like the dishwasher? Like, what? So, Killing in the Name. Uh, can't recommend enough any of their albums. I think if it's not already, Battle Los Angeles should be in the Hall of Fame for greatest albums of all time. I think it might actually be this song, but like top comment on YouTube for one of their like concerts or whatever was like, this is the angriest guy in a polo shirt I've ever seen. So, party on, rock on, listen to some Rage Against the Machine. And overall, I hope this helps. I hope this resonates. And if it doesn't, I hope the next one does. Thank you so much.